You wake up. It's 10,000 BC. You open your eyes, and the first thing you see is a ceiling made of rough stone. Not drywall, not peeling paint you've been promising yourself you'll fix someday. Just cold rock hanging over your head. If you're lucky, there's still a little warmth left in the fire from the night before. Around you, people are beginning to stir. Someone is feeding the embers. A child is still asleep beneath an animal skin. Outside, the world is quiet except for birds, insects, and the distant sound of moving water. There is no alarm clock demanding your attention, no emails waiting to be answered, no endless stream of notifications competing for your focus. The day ahead will certainly involve work, but probably not as much as you've been led to believe. For generations, we've imagined prehistoric life as one endless emergency. Every hour spent hunting, gathering, avoiding predators, fighting hunger, and desperately trying not to die. It's a picture repeated in documentaries, movies, and even history books. Ancient humans, we're told, had no time for leisure because survival consumed every waking moment. The evidence tells a very different story. For most of human history, once the day's essential work was finished, there were still hours left before sleep. Long evenings with no television, no books, no internet, no organized sports, and no schedules. Just a remarkably intelligent brain sitting around a fire with time to fill. That raises a question we almost never ask. What did ancient humans actually do when there was nothing they had to do? The answer turns out to explain far more than prehistoric evenings. It helps reveal why we still lose ourselves in stories, spend hours playing games, gossip about other people, fill our lives with music, create art for no practical reason, and constantly search for the next thing that captures our attention. Those habits didn't begin in the modern world. They began around fires that burned thousands of years ago. The idea that prehistoric life was one endless struggle is surprisingly recent. It reflects the modern assumption that if a society lacks technology, it must compensate with constant labor. But when anthropologists began spending years living alongside hunter-gatherer communities during the 20th century, they discovered something that challenged this picture almost completely. Groups such as the Ju-Hwansi of the Kalahari Desert, the Hadza of Tanzania, and several indigenous Australian communities offered researchers the closest living comparisons to the lifestyles our ancestors followed for hundreds of thousands of years. While no modern group is a perfect snapshot of the past, these societies share enough similarities to provide valuable clues about how humans lived before agriculture reshaped everything. What researchers found surprised almost everyone. People certainly worked. Hunting demanded patience and skill. Gathering edible plants required deep environmental knowledge. Fires had to be maintained, tools repaired, shelters built, children cared for, and meals prepared. Survival wasn't effortless, but it also wasn't an endless marathon. Study after study suggested that many hunter-gatherers spent only 3 to 5 hours each day on the essential tasks required to meet their needs. Once those jobs were finished, there was something many modern people feel they can barely imagine. Free time. Marshall Solins famously described hunter-gatherers as the original affluent society. Not because they possessed great wealth, but because their wants were relatively modest and could often be satisfied without endless work. By modern standards, they weren't poor in time. In many ways, they were rich in it. Of course, free time creates its own challenge. Human brains are unusually expensive organs. Although they make up only a small fraction of our body weight, they consume an enormous share of our daily energy. Evolution didn't build a brain this large simply to switch itself off whenever food had been collected. It evolved to predict, imagine, solve problems, recognize patterns, build relationships, and explore possibilities. When immediate survival stopped demanding its full attention, that restless machinery kept searching for something worthy of its attention. That's why boredom isn't a modern disease created by smartphones or office jobs. It's much older. Boredom appears whenever a curious, highly intelligent brain finds itself with more mental capacity than the present moment requires. Our ancestors experienced it just as surely as we do today. So once the hunt was over, the fire was burning steadily, and darkness settled across the landscape, a different question emerged. If survival wasn't filling every hour, what exactly was everyone doing with the rest of the evening? Free time created an opportunity, but it also created a problem. A group of highly social, highly intelligent humans could only spend so long staring into a fire before someone opened their mouth. And once they did, they almost certainly weren't discussing philosophy or the meaning of existence. They were talking about each other. That might sound trivial, even a little disappointing, until you realize that gossip may be one of the most important inventions our species ever developed. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed that language itself may have grown out of a much older primate behavior. Among monkeys and apes, social bonds are maintained through grooming. One individual picks parasites from another's fur, strengthening trust while lowering stress. The problem is that grooming is slow. You can only groom one companion at a time. As human communities gradually became larger, this method simply couldn't keep everyone connected. Conversation solved that limitation. Instead of strengthening one relationship at a time, a single speaker could engage several listeners at once. Around a campfire, an entire group could laugh, react, argue, and reinforce their shared understanding of one another. Language became social grooming, and the most valuable information wasn't about distant mountains or tomorrow's weather. It was about people, who shared food when supplies were scarce, who proved reliable during the hunt, who avoided work whenever possible, who could be trusted to watch the children. These weren't idle conversations, they were survival tools. In a small community where everyone depended on everyone else, reputation could mean the difference between receiving help in difficult times or being quietly pushed to the edge of the group. Gossip allowed information about cooperation, generosity, selfishness, and trustworthiness to spread without every individual needing to witness every event firsthand. At the same time, it was entertaining. Anyone who has ever promised they don't like drama before immediately asking what happened next already understands the appeal. Modern social media feeds, celebrity news, neighborhood rumors, and whispered office conversations all revolve around exactly the same subject that fascinated people thousands of generations ago. Our technology has transformed beyond recognition, but the human brain still lights up when another person's story unfolds. That shouldn't surprise us. We evolved inside communities where understanding other people was one of the most valuable skills imaginable. Every conversation refined that understanding a little further, but even the busiest camp eventually ran out of news. After enough evenings, everyone already knew who argued over the meat, who embarrassed themselves during the hunt, and who had quietly fallen in love. The fire still crackled beneath the stars. The night was still young, and minds that had evolved to seek endless stimulation weren't ready for silence. So humanity took its next extraordinary step. When reality stopped providing new stories, people began creating their own. That simple shift, from sharing events to inventing them, changed human history. Human imagination escaped the limits of the present. A hunt no longer had to be retold exactly as it occurred. A dangerous animal could become larger, a clever hunter wiser, a distant valley more mysterious. Real experiences mixed with memory until entirely new worlds emerged, worlds that existed nowhere except inside the minds of those listening. That ability changed our species forever. Long before writing, stories became the way humans explored possibilities without risking their lives. You could learn from a hero's mistake without making it yourself. You could imagine unfamiliar landscapes before ever setting foot in them. You could prepare children for dangers they had never encountered simply by telling them about someone who had. The caves themselves may have become part of that experience. Across Europe, archaeologists have discovered paintings dating back more than 30,000 years that often appear far beyond the cave entrances, hidden in chambers that require deliberate effort to reach. Many of these spaces possess remarkable acoustic properties. Voices echo, footsteps resonate, and even a quiet whisper seems to fill the darkness. Now imagine sitting there. A small fire flickers against the stone walls. Shadows dance across paintings of bison, horses, mammoths, and lions. As the flame moves, the animals seem almost alive, their bodies shifting with the contours of the rock. A storyteller's voice echoes through the chamber, while listeners watch the images appear and disappear in the firelight. It's difficult not to see the resemblance. No projector, no surround sound, no streaming service. Yet every essential ingredient of immersive entertainment is already there. Visual storytelling, dramatic narration, carefully controlled lighting, and an audience experiencing the same story together. In a very real sense, these caves may have been humanity's first theaters. Stories did far more than entertain. They became the most reliable storage system humans had ever invented. Long before books or libraries existed, entire histories, survival skills, family lineages, and spiritual beliefs were preserved inside carefully crafted narratives. Indigenous Australian oral traditions, for example, have retained remarkably accurate descriptions of landscapes that disappeared beneath rising seas thousands of years ago. The land changed. The stories remembered. That's because the human brain doesn't naturally remember lists of facts. It remembers characters, conflict, emotion, and cause and effect. Wrap knowledge inside a compelling narrative, and it becomes astonishingly durable. Thousands of years later, we still rely on exactly the same mental machinery. Whether you're listening to a podcast on your morning commute, binge watching a television series, reading a novel before bed, or sitting in a movie theater, your brain is responding to storytelling in much the same way it did beside a Paleolithic fire. The screens are new. The storyteller is older than civilization itself. Stories gave people a way to travel beyond reality without ever leaving the fire. But there was another discovery that required even fewer words. In fact, it may have begun before language was needed at all. The oldest confirmed musical instruments ever discovered date back roughly 40,000 to 60,000 years. Among the most remarkable are flutes carved from the hollow bones of vultures and from mammoth ivory, carefully shaped with finger holes positioned to produce different notes. These weren't accidental objects. Someone deliberately transformed ordinary materials into something that served no practical purpose except making sound. It's a surprisingly revealing moment in human history. Nobody invents a musical instrument while running from a predator. Nobody experiments with different notes in the middle of a desperate hunt. Creating music requires curiosity, patience, and, perhaps most importantly, enough free time for the mind to wander. Somewhere in prehistoric Europe, a restless human looked at a bird bone and wondered, what else could this become? Before melodies filled the air, however, there was almost certainly rhythm. You don't need craftsmanship to discover rhythm. Two stones struck together, a stick against a log, hands clapping in unison. Human bodies are naturally drawn to repeating patterns, and once one person found a steady beat, others instinctively joined in. Music became something experienced together rather than alone. That shared rhythm changes the brain in ways ordinary conversation cannot. Neuroscientists have found that synchronized movement and music encourage the release of chemicals associated with trust, pleasure, and social bonding. Heartbeats begin to align. Movements become coordinated. A collection of individuals starts behaving more like a single group. For communities that depended on cooperation to survive, that wasn't just enjoyable, it was incredibly useful. You can still see the same ancient instinct today. Thousands of strangers at a concert clap in perfect time without planning it. Football fans chant together as if they've rehearsed for weeks. People dance with complete strangers and somehow feel connected by the end of the song. Technology has changed the scale, but not the experience. Perhaps that's the most remarkable part of all. One person's idle experiment, born from a quiet evening and an inquisitive mind, grew into a universal language shared by every known human culture. If boredom helped create storytelling, it may also have composed the first notes of humanity's soundtrack. Music gave people a way to move together, but eventually they discovered another remarkable way to spend an evening. Instead of cooperating, they could compete, without anyone getting seriously hurt. Long before elaborate board games appeared, people were already playing with chance. Archaeologists have uncovered knuckle bones from sheep, goats, and other animals at sites thousands of years old. These small bones could be tossed like dice, each side producing a different result. What may have begun as simple amusement gradually evolved into games with rules, strategies, and winners. Then came one of history's earliest masterpieces of game design, the royal game of Ur. Created around 4,500 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, it spread across the Near East for centuries. We have discovered beautifully decorated game boards, humble versions carved from ordinary wood, and even clay tablets explaining how the game was played. Rich or poor, merchant or ruler, people sat across from one another, rolled the dice, and tested their luck and judgment. That raises an interesting question. Why would evolution favor spending valuable time on games that produce nothing tangible? Because games allow humans to practice real-life skills without paying real-life costs. Competition is deeply rooted in our biology. Throughout our evolutionary history, individuals competed for resources, status, mates, and influence. But constant physical conflict is dangerous. Injuries weaken groups, and dead competitors contribute nothing to the community. Games offered a brilliant alternative. They transformed rivalry into something structured, predictable, and relatively safe. You could prove your intelligence, courage, speed, or strategy without turning every disagreement into violence. Children instinctively understand this. Around the world, they invent games without being taught, using play to develop coordination, communication, creativity, and problem solving. Adults never truly lose that instinct, they simply give it more elaborate rules. Few examples illustrate this better than the ancient Olympic Games. During the Olympic truce, Greek city-states suspended ongoing conflicts so athletes and spectators could travel safely to compete. Imagine that for a moment. Societies willing to wage war against one another also agreed to pause those wars to watch people race, wrestle, and throw spears. Play had become important enough to reshape politics itself. Today, the arenas are larger, and the audiences are measured in millions. Stadiums erupt during championship finals, families gather around board games on quiet evenings, and esports fill packed arenas with fans cheering digital competitors. The games have changed, but the reason we play has not. Deep inside, we are still satisfying an ancient desire to test ourselves, celebrate skill, and enjoy the thrill of competition, without having to fight for survival. Competition made evenings exciting, but humans rarely celebrated victories alone. At some point, our ancestors discovered that food tasted better when shared, conversations flowed more easily in large groups, and certain fermented drinks made those gatherings even more memorable. Archaeological evidence shows that humans were deliberately fermenting beverages at least 10,000 years ago. In fact, some researchers have proposed one of archaeology's most entertaining debates. Did bread come before beer? Or did the desire for beer help inspire agriculture itself? It sounds almost absurd, but the idea has serious scientific backing. Cultivating wild grains required enormous effort. If early communities were willing to settle in one place and invest months tending crops, the reward may not have been food alone. Fermented drinks offered something equally valuable, a reliable way to strengthen social bonds, celebrate successful harvests, and bring entire communities together. One of the strongest pieces of evidence comes from Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Built nearly 12,000 years ago, long before cities, pottery, or writing, the site contains enormous carved stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures. The scale of the construction alone suggests cooperation on an astonishing level. Even more intriguing is the evidence that large groups gathered there to feast and quite possibly to drink fermented beverages. Think about what that means. People were traveling considerable distances not because they had to survive another day, but because they wanted to gather. They shared meals, exchanged stories, strengthened alliances, found partners, settled disputes, and celebrated something larger than themselves. These weren't merely practical meetings. They were social events. In a sense, civilization may have been built around the party before it was built around the city. That ancient instinct has never disappeared. Music festivals, holiday celebrations, weddings, neighborhood barbecues, nights out with friends, even meeting co-workers for a drink after work, all serve the same purpose they did thousands of years ago. We come together, eat, laugh, tell stories, and momentarily set aside the pressures of everyday life. The locations have changed from stone circles to city streets, but the human need to celebrate together remains almost exactly the same. After the music faded and the celebrations ended, some people did something even stranger. They picked up pieces of charcoal, crushed minerals into pigment, and disappeared deep inside caves to paint images that served no obvious purpose at all. The caves of Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira still preserve breathtaking scenes created tens of thousands of years ago. Herds of bison appear to charge across stone walls. Horses seem to gallop through the flickering light. Lions, mammoths, and rhinoceroses are rendered with remarkable accuracy, often using the natural curves of the rock to create the illusion of movement and depth. What's remarkable isn't just their beauty, it's that these paintings appear to offer no immediate survival advantage. A painted bison doesn't provide food. A beautifully drawn horse doesn't make a spear more effective. Every hour spent collecting pigments, preparing surfaces, and carefully applying images was an hour not spent hunting or gathering. Yet humans created art anyway, over and over again across thousands of years and continents. That suggests creativity wasn't a luxury that appeared after civilization. It was already part of what made us human. Creating art allowed people to communicate ideas that words alone could not capture. It strengthened shared identities, inspired emotion, preserved important experiences, and perhaps even demonstrated skill, imagination, and intelligence to others. Evolution doesn't always reward only the strongest bodies. It also rewards the minds capable of seeing possibilities where none seem to exist. There is another reason these paintings feel so powerful. Every brushstroke carries the same quiet message across tens of thousands of years. I was here. I saw this. It mattered to me. That impulse still drives us today. The tools have become unimaginably more sophisticated, but the motivation is strikingly familiar. Every photographer framing the perfect shot, every filmmaker crafting a scene, every musician recording a song, every novelist writing a chapter, and every artist putting paint on a canvas is participating in a tradition that began long before cities or writing existed. The first cave painters weren't simply decorating stone walls. They were doing something profoundly human, transforming imagination into something that could outlive its creator. And thousands of generations later, we're still trying to leave our own mark on the walls around us. And that's the irony of human history. The moments that seem least important, the quiet hours after the work was finished, may have shaped us just as much as the struggle to survive. Around those evening fires, people talked, laughed, competed, made music, told stories, celebrated together, and created art simply because their minds demanded something more than existence. Entertainment wasn't invented after civilization. In many ways, it helped create civilization. Our tools have transformed beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. Campfires became movie screens. Bone flutes became symphony orchestras. Cave paintings became films. Gossip became social media. But the brain experiencing all of it is still running on ancient software. We never stopped being the people who gathered at the end of the day looking for connection, meaning, and wonder. Every movie you watch, every game you play, every song you hear, every story that captures your imagination, every conversation that makes you laugh, and every work of art that moves you can trace its origins back to a fire, a restless human mind, and a few quiet hours before sleep.